Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ellen Davis from the Consumer Brands Association. We're so excited to have you with us this afternoon for the return of our CPG Speak series, brought to you thanks from support by our friends at PwC. This series allows our industry to come together to learn important lessons from company leaders and think differently about their own businesses. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by Shane Grant, EVP and CEO of Danone North America and member of the Consumer Brands Association Board of Directors. Today, we're going to dive into how Danone connects performance to purpose, how the company is addressing food accessibility, and how both Shane and Danone approach societal issues and corporate responsibility. Shane, so excited to have you today. You ready to get started?
Happy to be here, Ellen, and absolutely yes.
All right, I want to rewind the tape just a little bit to a couple of years ago when we were right in the middle of the beginning of a long global pandemic, tons of change happening in the world and in CPG. And that's right when you joined Danone. And I joined Consumer Brands about the same time, so we can empathize with each other on what it was like to start a new role then. What was it like to take a new leadership role right at the beginning of the pandemic? And how did the timing of that appointment impact your approach to your role and the way that you're moving the business forward?
Yeah, thanks, Ellen, and really happy to be with you here today and look forward to the conversation. Maybe we have a shared discussion about that afterwards. But yeah. I think the short answer is yes. It was probably not what I or Danone expected, and then it was upon us. Like I think many leaders in the industry. I think in terms of approach, I would say that the way we viewed that, and personally the way I approached that, was I think a combination of challenge and opportunity. And the challenge, I think, for me personally, but also more broadly for our business, was being able to learn the business, being able to connect with our teams, our leadership team, and then our broader team. I think create some of the business change that was needed in our business. And I think most importantly, have the team embrace some of that change and be able to drive it in a high accountability way. I think the opportunity was that this presented an obvious moment for us to reset our business in a number of ways. And, we embrace that, I think, in terms of really authoring a ground up new strategy for our business, a strategy that was authored to be, I would say, simple but not simplistic, but a strategy that was designed to fundamentally accelerate the growth of the business, accelerate the competitiveness of the business, and have us compete through and then importantly after the pandemic. And I think that sort of blend of challenge and opportunity, I think, in terms of some of the challenge piece, first and foremost, the team were unbelievable in terms of the generosity they offered me to educate me on the business, get me up to speed with the business in what was a really challenging, not seen before environment. Well, I think, I focused a lot on quantity of connection, because I think it forced us into a moment to be, frankly, much higher frequency on all levels of the business.
Yeah.
I think it was a really important moment for empathy and trust. And, we have embraced institutionalized flexibility in our business. And I think that's a key indicator of trust and modernity for our business. I think it was a moment which really drove new levels of transparency. As a new leader, the team was able to see into my world, as I was able to see in theirs. And I think that was a really important moment, a leadership moment for all of us. And I think, on the people side, and I think this is one of the really good things to come out of this last couple of years, is the importance of being more human and less transactional. And, we're not in the quantity game on talent, we're in the quality game on talent. And that means knowing our talent, knowing our people. And I think this has provided a moment where that was really, really important. And then on the opportunity side, I think we reset the strategy, we reshaped our business in the context of that strategy. And then the team have done an unbelievable job of executing that strategy over the last couple of years to, with results we're really proud of in terms of growth and competitiveness. So, now we're determined to keep that momentum moving.
It's interesting, the perspective of somebody was saying to me that what happened during the pandemic and all of us going virtual really kind of made us take withdrawals from our, kind of company culture and company, connections. And as a new CEO, a new leader coming into the company, you didn't have a big, savings account of goodwill to draw from when you came in. Just as you think back to that experience and what it was like to build those connections with people in a virtual environment versus being able to get everybody together in a room, anything that, you would do over again, or anything that maybe didn't work as well as you had thought in a virtual world?
Look, I think what I learned through that period was, again, this notion of high quantity and high frequency connections, and those could be formal or informal, and they needed to be one-on-one or as a team, because it's hard to replicate the sticky glue of the everyday when you're not in the corridor together. And so I think that was, just really, really important. It's important coming out of it, but it was really important in the depths of it. And obviously it was important for me to really commit to know our leaders, just know them, and not in a transactional way, but knew what was important to them, knew what motivated them, knew how they felt about our business, knew how they were feeling professionally and personally, and also recognizing that all of our people had a different version of COVID and the reality of what that was for them at home and what it was for them personally and their family or extended family. And so I think just understanding that and respecting that, I think, was really important.
So let's fast forward to today a little bit. I'd love to talk about what you're seeing just on a macro level, and then we'll talk about this balance of performance and purpose, which is such a part of your DNA. What are you seeing in the business environment today? What's happening for the business? What's happening with the consumer from where you sit?
Yeah, I think maybe a few things. I think, clearly the US consumer in particular, I think, is in a really dynamic, hard to predict moment. And I think that demands a certain amount of agility from our teams, from our business. I do think, in sort of the macro context, there's some pretty clear dynamics. I mean, I think firstly, to state the obvious, the purchasing power of the consumer is under real pressure, be it interest rates, be it wage rates behind inflation. So there's purchasing power squeeze out there for sure. I think that is offset to some extent, at least so far, in terms of really strong cash reserves for a lot of consumers and employment rates that are still remarkably high. I think there is sort of some contrasting behaviors we're seeing in the market, to the extent that clearly there is a down trade and some sacrificing of large ticket consumer discretionary items. And you see that in the big retailers as they report in the last couple of quarters. And I think it's fairly clear that that's happening. But there's also some areas of sustained investment, travel, which is really obvious, where there is almost a kind of a make good for the last 2 to 3 years. And so consumers are determined to hold on to some of those areas of spending. Mm-hmm. I think, what we've seen in food and beverage, I think pretty consistently, is a pretty resilient industry, and consumers prioritizing food and beverage expenditure for their families. I think what's really important, and this is the work we're doing now, is really two things. One is, how do we stay and keep our business on the right side of essential? So obviously, consumers are going to prioritize what they consider essential food and beverage for their families, for the types of occasions they need. And, we're the biggest yogurt business in the US. We're the biggest plant-based business in the US. We've got a very big coffee footprint, amongst other things. And the strategic challenge is, how do we keep our business and our brands on the right side of essential so that we can maintain that resilience, but also do some things that are very specific to create more sort of recession resilience in our business. And I'm sure we'll talk about that in a minute. I think maybe the second piece I would say is that some of the really big structural shifts that happened through COVID, we've seen sticking. So some of the big that were happening before COVID, accelerated in COVID, we're seeing sticking. So, the what and how people shop. So some of the big trends around low sugar, high protein, gut health, part-time plant-based consumers, indulgent moments, those are here and they have accelerated, and we've really deliberately positioned our business against those spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And then how they shop, which is much more digitally enabled, much more at-home occasions that we see being sticky. And so some of those dynamics are real and they've stayed with us, and we're obviously trying to position our business against it. So, I think so far so good. It's required enormous amounts of, I think, resilience from the team to stay on the right side of the consumer and the customer. And we keep trying to do that.
What about supply chain? We've heard from CEOs and supply chain leaders in our membership that, this can feel like whack-a-mole. You solve one problem and here comes another one. What are you seeing in the supply chain environment today in terms of what you're challenged by, what you think maybe is finally past us, if there is anything?
Yeah, I think like, it feels like every other CPG, it's been a pretty never before seen experience for our supply chain teams. I think, the headline is, Ellen, the general direction of travel is better on all dimensions, input availability, our levels of output, our levels of service to the customer. But we're far from perfect. We're not yet back to where we want to be. I think, the commodity environment is still volatile. Energy prices, shipping are still, we see, very volatile. And there's different dynamics commodity by commodity, milk versus palm versus, all the other inputs. We see some different dynamics emerging piece by piece. For sure, we have seen demand remain high. And I'm not telling you anything you can't see in our earnings, but, the North America business in the second quarter had almost 9% growth and positive volume. And, that's as we've driven, pretty assertive pricing and a lot of mix in the business. Yep. So the demand is still there. And I think that's a credit to what our teams have done, but also it's a real credit to our supply chain teams to keep supplying the market. Mm-hmm. We've taken some actions through this, which I think were right, which is we took some actions to simplify our business, less SKUs, and pretty dramatically so. We diversified our supply base. And I would say much more aggressively prioritize flexibility versus efficiency in some moments. So yes, it's been a supply chain adventure for sure.
As we think ahead to what's coming next, you mentioned volatility in supply chain over the last couple of years and the industry, what's going on with the consumer. We talked about, you alluded to recession readiness. How are you thinking about that? How are you preparing for some of that continued economic volatility? What are you and your teams doing right now to feel like you're in a good place? Yeah,
we're thinking about the business on a number of dimensions, I think, through this headline of a recession, what we call a recession readiness playbook. And, I would say that the macro call to action is don't waste this crisis, and a determination to continue to grow the business and increase the competitiveness of the business through this and coming out of it. Mm-hmm. That's got, and reinvest in the business at a moment when we suspect others may not. And so, we're determined to hold on to that stance. I think it leads us to thinking about adaptations to the business in a number of ways. So let me give you a few examples. We've got in our yogurt portfolio, a pretty large stable of brands. We can very deliberately position those brands and reposition those brands to create good levels of what we call brand stratification. More lower price, high quality entry points, mid-tier and premium. So we can cover the spectrum in terms of the types of consumers that may want to enter our business. Mm-hmm. I think we're also thinking about our portfolio and how we adapt the portfolio. So for example, we have a very big coffee creamers business. We know from experience that in moments of economic hardship, a lot of consumers shift from a food service coffee experience to an at-home coffee experience. We can help with that.
Mhm.
And so how we use the portfolio to advantage through this period matters. Brand messaging, quality ingredients, brand differentiation is going to be really, really important. Package architecture. So, we sell almost 80% of our plant-based business, for example, today in one package. Really good for line efficiency, not so great for price point diversification. We can shift that quite quickly. And so surrounding the shopper with more affordable entry points that provide a way to access our brands, but a more accessible price point, we think is going to be really important, and we're working on that. And then obviously, I think being able to generate good price appreciation, which we have been able to do with a very deliberate investment in revenue growth management capability, gives us the flexibility to invest back in the right kind of mechanics when and if we need to. So, I think a number of dimensions, all of which are mobilized in our business today.
Mm-hmm. So we talked a lot about the success that Danone has seen and how you're preparing for continued success, regardless of where the economy turns. What is unique about your company, I think, compared to a lot of large CPG brands, is that you're one of the world's largest certified B Corps, which means, you've got a mandate to use your business as a force for good, but you're also a listed company and you're accountable to your shareholders. You guys talk about this balance of performance and purpose. I would love for you to share a little bit more about how you're thinking about that, whether there's a synergy, whether there's a tension, how you approach that as the leader of this business. Yeah,
so Alan, I think, firstly, just to kind of restate a few things that were inherent in your question. I mean, this purpose centricity of the business is deeply rooted in Danone. It's one of the reasons I came here was, I think what is a very modern model today of the integration of performance and purpose. Mm-hmm. It's deeply rooted in our business. It's something we talk about as the dual project, which was born actually 50 years ago this year in our business, which is this dual project of social and economic. And so we hold that tension in our business constantly. It manifests in our governance, as you said, in terms of a B Corp. So that requires a lot and demands a lot of our business in terms of accountability and the number of stakeholders we report to and are accountable to. But it's also beyond that, a real cultural dynamic in the business, which we're really proud of. And so that guides everything we do. I think the way that we approach it, and I think when we're at our absolute best, is not a trade-off between the two. It's in fact the hardwiring of the two together. And, it's rooted in a belief that the more we can scale the business and grow, the more impact we can have in terms of societal good and mission. And the more we embed purpose in our business, the more competitive the business is. Mm-hmm. And, we've got really concrete examples of that from a brand like Too Good, for example, which is one of the fastest growing brands in Greek yogurt over the last 2 to 3 years. That has got purpose deeply ingrained into what it is, what the brand is and what we sell. Same with a brand like Horizon Organic. Same with the actions that we, recently took on in terms of infant formula in the US. And so at our best, I think we put the two together. What's good for our business becomes very good for society. And we really try and hardwire the two things together. We're not perfect, but increasingly that's what we're trying to do.
Can you share an example of that where the kind of the purpose element really continues with different stakeholders, right? Whether you're from your farmer partners to what products consumers see on the shelf, how does that come to life?
Yeah, I mean, maybe one example is, I think to sort of extend your question sort of up and down our supply chain. Mm-hmm. One of our partners is the McCarty Family Farms, an enormous family-owned farm in Kansas, and actually I had the privilege of being there just a couple of months ago with the family. Farming and agriculture is the heart of our business. I mean, obviously, given what we make, and therefore the type of farmer partners we have is really critical to us. And we have hundreds of direct, long-term relationships with farmers, and so they're a really integral part of our business. The way we manage the relationships with our farmers is quite unique, and it's a model we call cost plus, which is essentially provides some predictability on both sides of milk prices and importantly, milk margin for the farmer. And so it provides a baseline, I think, for a really healthy, sustained long-term relationship, provides a baseline for our farmers to invest and upgrade in technology and come with us on the journey on product innovation in particular.
Right.
But it also, because it creates a long-term marriage between us and a number of our farm partners, incentivizes the strategies of the business to track. And so, you know, the McCarty family farm, for example, has become a B Corp. And, you know, so the alignment of strategically where our business is going and a belief of that as a source of competitive advantage for us and them tends to track in line. And so it's really key to our partner relationships. And we've got a number of other examples I talked about. Too Good, you know, ingrained in that business, for example. I've got a product sitting right here called Good Save, which, you know, essentially uses reconstituted fruit, what otherwise would have been waste, as part of the product.
Oh.
Became one of the fastest growing SKUs at one of our largest retailers and is now expanding nationally. So we've got lots of evidence points where it's, Ellen, I would say, good for society and good for our business.
Love that. All right, I'm going to pull on this purpose-driven thread a little bit and talk about food accessibility. Just a few weeks ago, there was a major event at the White House. You were there, or with the White House, near the White House, you were there, focused on hunger, nutrition, and health. I know Danone made some commitments at the event and would love for you to share a little bit more about what food access means for your company, how that's embedded in your DNA, and also how you're working with either retailers, the government, or other stakeholders to bring those kind of commitments or that purpose to life.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, it was a really honor to be involved in that. And, you know, what I learned is that it was actually the first conference of its type since 1969, quite unbelievably. So we were honored to be at the table and to make what we thought was a pretty significant commitment and contribution to that agenda. And I do think it's really critical if we're going to move the needle on this, that this has to be a multi-stakeholder engagement. It's public and private. And so we were really, really honored to be involved. I think, you know, how we think about food access probably got two dimensions. One, again, is through this lens of who we are. You know, if you think about our mission, health through food to as many people as possible, implies access.
Right.
And it implies access at scale. Also see the Dual Project, also see B Corp. So this is just core to who we are. I think, you know, the how we, probably more importantly, is how do we make that happen? And, you know, at least the way we think about it is, I would say, through a few dimensions. First is what we sell, because it's one thing to provide access, it's another thing to provide access to high quality food. And, you know, if you think about, you know, our portfolio today, 70% of our portfolio is nutritious or nutritiously dense. That's a really good start point. What we also know is that, especially coming out of the pandemic, people want to eat healthier. You know, 75% of Americans will say they want to do that. And so there is a fundamental consumer demand there that, you know, we think we can service and therefore be good to our mission, deliver the mission, but grow the business. Mm-hmm. You know, I think what we're trying to do is enact the market to deliver access to better food, but also tap into fundamentally these consumer shifts. See low sugar, high protein, gut health, flexitarianism, permissible indulgence. If we service those consumer needs, we're going to grow the business, but we're also going to provide access to better quality food. I also think the last part of what we sell is using our capability for good. And, you know, we have, you know, Danone has, and I think the industry has, exceptional research and innovation capability to make healthy food taste good. And we know we can do that on our products. And increasingly, we are raising the bar. A really good experience, because we know it has to be the scale healthy food with health, and combining those two things. I do think it's really important, Alan, to think about how we sell in addition to the what. And by that, I mean providing right access points in terms of affordable access points to good food. See smaller packages at more affordable price points, see brands that are high quality, but not necessarily super premium. And our ability to provide that range to different types of consumers matters. And then, the last dimension I would say is sort of where we show up. And obviously inherent in our growth strategy is high quality and expanding outlet execution with big retail customers. And so the multiplier effect of our business with some of our biggest customers, we think is massive. Hundreds of millions of Americans that we can reach. And, we have pilots going on, for example, with the biggest retailer in this country in Chicago, for example, right now, where we are amplifying access and communication around better food choices. We also have, for example, the ability and concretely reach almost 500,000 health professionals every year. That drives better education. So this sort of notion of partner multiplier, we think, is just really, really important. So I think our industry is not perfect on access, but I think the game we're in here is constant improvement.
Yeah. When we think about food access, let's also talk about the baby formula shortage, which was, a huge crisis for many families and companies this year. You guys had a huge leadership role, and I know worked a lot with the FDA and were critical in helping increase supply of baby formula. Can you talk a little bit about what that situation was like for the company and maybe what you learned from it?
Well, firstly, I think, Ellen, as Hugh pointed out, this was just first and foremost a human crisis, a family crisis in this country that probably none of us ever expected would ever occur, in the United States, but it did. I think a few things. One, we saw this as an immediate opportunity to mobilize mission and action. We have today what is a pretty small specialized infant formula business with a brand called Neocate, which is not a mainstream formula brand. It's a very specialized formula product for babies with very specific needs. Our first action was to really ramp up supply of that brand and that product in the US. And, we added almost 500,000 units over the course of the crisis, additional into the United States. And that really matters, because if you're a family that needs that product, you need that product.
Right.
And, so that was a really important first step. I think the second step was, and it became quickly apparent that, with a brand like Aptamil, for example, which is, many of the people on the call today probably don't know what Aptamil is. This is Aptamil. It's in fact the #1 infant formula in Europe. And that's a Danone product and a Danone brand. So the company globally has real expertise in this sector. It's just not a sector we're in the US. And so the immediate opportunity, obviously, is can we contribute to the opportunity here and the moment here and bring in Aptamil to the United States? And that required deep partnership with the White House, deep partnership with the FDA, and enormous amounts of action for our team here in the US and globally in terms of unlocking our supply chain, being able to get product into the US. And in the end, we will bring in, I think, close to 1.3 million units of Aptamil into the US and have over the last number of months. And you see that now on shelf, in a number of different retail partners. Yeah. So long way of saying, Ellen, I think, the first reaction is how can we contribute to this given our global expertise? And, I can tell you for our people, it was a real pride point, a real moment of passion and pride for our business, because it was really our mission and action. And of course, there's a commercial opportunity here. And so the partnership with the government to establish what are the long-term, mid-term guardrails for this sector have obviously been dynamic and moving. And we're pleased to say we have a line of sight, at least in the midterm, for Aptamil staying in the United States. So that's obviously interesting for us commercially as we look to build the awareness of that brand in the US and service the market here. But we're really proud of, I would say, a real mission moment at scale.
And should be. Congratulations on all of that work. I love the show and tell, by the way. This is like, you've got all sorts of great stuff to pull.
I've got all sorts of things on the shelf here, Alan. So we could talk about anything and I can show you a prop.
Okay. I love it. Let's switch to our last topic, which is societal issues and corporate responsibility. Boy, this is an area where Danone has really taken maybe a different approach than some other large brands, a very unique approach distinct to your company. Before we get to these questions, I wanted to remind everybody that we do have time for some questions at the end. So please please put those in the chat. And then Shane, let's talk a little bit about how you think about societal issues, and then we'll take some questions. I would love to know what your approach has been. I've seen your LinkedIn posts and certainly some company announcements to some of the big, tricky societal issues that we have all faced in this country, and that many companies have faced through their employee base, their other stakeholders. How are you approaching, what's happening right now in society, and what do you believe your role is as a leader here?
Well, you're right, Alan, this is not easy. It's not easy territory. I'm sure any leader would say this is not straightforward. It's not all completely objective. It has some areas of judgment for sure. Mm-hmm. I think a few things. One, as we approach some of these judgment calls and some of these issues, we try to do it in a really structured, thoughtful way. To not just react, but I would say importantly to anticipate some of the issues as much as we can. I do think it's also important to sort of declare we don't weigh in on every issue. We just don't. There are some issues that we determine we can't add value to, or are just not related to our business and what's important to our people or our values or our culture, and therefore we don't weigh in. And that's important, but there are some issues that we have chosen to have a position on, and we also think it's important that we do. Mm-hmm. We think it's important for us as a business in terms of the way we want to lead, but we also, and I think most importantly, feel this is important for our people. And it's important for our people to create a sense of attachment and pride for our business, but also a sense of belonging to our business in terms of not only what we sell, but who we are. Mm-hmm. And so, that really, really matters. The way that we, approach these issues, I would say, has got three equally weighted dimensions. One is the issue important to our people? Do we have a sense that this is important to our people and there is a high degree of energy around the issue, one way or the other? Is there a lot of energy with our people on the issue? I think the second is it related to our mission? Mm-hmm. So health through food to as many people as possible. If we think the issue collides with the mission, then we talk about it. The third dimension is, what are our values? And what have we said are the behaviors that we really believe in, the values that we really believe in? And so if an issue is, frankly, yes on all three, then we really talk about it as a team and decide, are we going to have a position? And are we going to have that position publicly? And what is that position going to be? And, so for example, when social justice issue came up, in the summer of 2020, when more recently Roe versus Wade came up, then we decided we should have a position because, Roe versus Wade particularly, collided with our mission, health, collided with our values, gender equity, and we knew our people really cared about it. Mm-hmm. Now, the last thing I would say is that how we communicate really matters. And what I mean by that is there's never universal agreement on these issues, never one position. And I think it's really important to embrace that. Mm-hmm. It's really important to acknowledge that there are different positions on it, and there's different positions even inside our organization. But through those three dimensions, there are some issues we think we should have a position on, and we think it's important for a sense of belonging and ownership of our company that we do.
Thank you. It was very well said, and I think the framework helps, maybe help some folks. Here's something I learned when we saw each other at the CPG Summit last month. You've implemented, I don't know what you call it. I'm calling it an open door policy one day a month, where I'll let you talk about it. You let people make appointments, they come share their thoughts with you. And what you'd said at the time is that you think you've taken more away from those conversations than other people. The approach was just so different and refreshing in a lot of ways. I'd love for you to talk about what it is, but also, can you give us a sense of what some of the things were that you've learned from it that have been so transformational for you?
Yes, I can try and do that. Firstly, to just sort of describe what it is, it's a stunningly simple idea and uncomplicated, which is I create some space once a month for anyone in our business to come see me. And that can be a one-on-one. It can be a small team. And the meeting has zero agenda except whatever's on the agenda of that person or that team. And back to probably the first question you asked, Ellen, of sort of COVID and starting as a leader. And I felt like that was a sort of a giant experiment that might be useful. It's proven really useful, at least for me. And it has been well subscribed, much to my shock, actually. And it's been useful for me on a couple of dimensions. One, again, back to this belief that we're in the game of quality human interaction and quality talent and quality relationships versus transaction. Lets me know more about people, just know them more. But it also gives me a chance to hear what they're worried about, hear what they're excited about, and create sort of an early warning system on some of those issues for the business. And so I think it's allowed me to just get a greater grip on what's happening inside our organization, all over our organization. I think the genesis of it is not necessarily that event or that routine, but a behavior that we set out as part of our new strategy 2 years ago, which was we want to engage in real dialogue. And that's about being more market facing. It's about having issues on the table. It's about a growth culture, not an explanation culture. You know, we will spend the first 10 minutes of a meeting talking about what the issue was and what we learned, and the next 50 minutes talking about what we're doing, not the inverse. And so it's about trust and transparency and more real conversations about what's happening in our business. Be really proud of what's good, and also have the issues on the table that we can enact and take on as a group and as a team.
Yeah, I think approachability probably has a lot to do with this too. I mean, you're a very approachable guy, but I think, you know, you wouldn't have a lot of people signing up for those things if they didn't feel like you were a good place to land in terms of, you know, having a conversation. So I just think that's fantastic, fascinating. One more question before we turn it over to questions. Let's just try to tie this all together. Performance, purpose, access, you know, employers' responsibility. How does all of this influence your approach to leadership?
Well, I think, you know, at least the way I think about, well, firstly, Ellen, you're right. These are all interconnected. I think for me, the way I try to approach, at least for me, my own leadership action is through an equal balance of 3 dimensions. One is strategic leadership of the business. I firmly believe that it's my and our executive team's responsibility to be able to create the why of the work. You know, not create that on our own. We need to co-create it with our people, but what's the agenda of the business? What are we trying to achieve and what's important? I think, you know, the second dimension is we have to be in the business of results leadership. Delivering our commitments, and frankly, winning changes everything. And, you know, we can grow the business, be successful in the market. You know, the collateral impacts of that are just so positive for our people and our business. I do, and then people leadership. And that's about being a champion for our team, a champion for our people. It's about being really tough on the results, but really careful with our people. And rewarding the behaviors that we said are going to be important in the culture we want to create. Building capability that allows us to sustain and repeat and make what we're doing more systemic. Maybe the last thing I would say, Alan, is I'm a proud Kiwi. Actually, I'm a proud American as of 3 weeks ago, but having now become a citizen, but obviously I'm not originally from the US. And we talk about a couple of concepts that are certainly important for me. And I will ask you to play these back in Māori after we finish the meeting. But the first of those is called whānau, which sort of loosely translated is family or community. And we talk about that in terms of the role that every person has in our community and the community of our business. The second concept we talk about is something called whakapapa, which is essentially the notion of legacy or being a good ancestor. And that's about what we're doing for the business to create a sustainable performing business hand the business off in better shape than we found it, to build a legacy that we're really, really proud of. And so we overlay those concepts and talk about them, certainly in terms of my leadership team, and then we talk about it as a business as well, because those are a couple of concepts that are important to me.
Love that. Thank you. I think everybody, I'm glad we're recording this so now I can go back and go through my chicken scratch notes and try to decipher what you were saying. Thank you. Let me get to a couple of questions. We are going to wrap up on time to be conscious of your schedule too, but let me go to a couple questions here. One is, related to what you said about ensuring your employees feel connected to the company, but also recognizing that COVID has changed the way a lot of people work and want to work. How does hybrid work come into play here? Are you finding it's harder to make this connection when people aren't in the same space every day? How are you identifying leaders at your company? We talked about that at the summit. Just what are your thoughts on the hybrid workforce and employees' expectations versus, where you sit as a leader in the company?
Yeah, a few things. I think it's a really important question. I think, firstly, on the talent question, we have purposefully upweighted in the last 2 years a real diligence around talent management and talent process, I would say. And what I mean by that is a real commitment group by group in our business to identify high potential talent, develop high potential talent, know our talent better, because what's embedded in the question, I think, is it's harder. It's harder to do. And so I think a real attention to that is really, really important, and we owe that to our people. I think the second piece, we have to recognize that, at least in our business, people want the flexibility, they demand the flexibility. And I do think that it would be a tragedy if we went back to what we were doing before. We learned that we don't need to do it that way. And so, we do believe in providing flexibility to people, and what comes with that is trust. And our people have shown they can really drive the business managing this way.
Right.
I think the third thing I would say is we're also conscious of an unintended consequence, which is connection and creativity, not efficiency, but effectiveness. And so what we have said, and we allow our teams to drive this team by team, is what we call purposeful presence, which is there are going to be moments and certain events where we need our people together. And that's for a specific engagement, a specific business problem, a business event, a team event. And we expect our people to be together for those. And what we're finding is that is driving really good engagement, because our people want to be together for those events and moments when they have to take on a challenge, drive an opportunity for the market, or just be together. And so we're trying to be very deliberate about that.
Helpful. All right, last question on digital. You mentioned that consumers will shop in a much more digitally enabled manner. This person just asking if you can expand on that a little bit. And this maybe gets to the food access question too. Yeah. I'm sure that's interwoven, but just, will they be shifting more of their purchase online? How are you preparing for this? Just any kind of general thoughts on what you're seeing.
A few things. I think one of the capabilities that we identified 2 years ago was digital, and frankly, we were not at the level we needed to be. And so that's an area we've invested pretty aggressively in. That strategy's got a number of dimensions. One is digital shopping, and I mean, we're largely a fresh business, and now 10% of our business is digital. And that was 1% 2.5 years ago. So, it's become just a meaningful part of our business. That behavior we think is here to stay. And so we're going to stay invested in it, and with our retail partners, with our own capability. It's just a really important part of our business today and how we sell. I think the broader ecosystem is the application of digital tools to how we run the business. And so, for example, the modernization of our supply chain has got an enormous digital component to it. And, we're now in a position, I think, coming out of a period of just trying to supply the market, where we're really investing to be able to upgrade some of our digital capability in that space. The third area I would say is much more to the everyday experience of our people, which is, if we're going to be hybrid, we need better digital tools. And so digitizing some of that and upgrading some of that experience is just, we think, really, really important. So it's it's just pervading, I would say, all aspects of our business today.
I love the connection to digital with people. Most folks don't go there when you talk about it, but it's absolutely something that's important to keep our workforce, continuing. All right, I'm not as good with threes as you are, Shane. I've learned a lot on today's conversation, but really grateful that you joined us for today's session. I think everybody listening understands why we were so keen to have you as one of the conversations that we could have for CPG Speaks. Grateful to our friends at PwC for their support of this series. Big takeaways for me, we talked a lot about agility and the importance of you navigating the business forward at a time of incredible unpredictability, the performance, purpose, synergy, where if you can get both right, that actually is what moves the business forward the fastest and the most. And then this concept of really building a foundation of trust and investing in people through connections and through your perspective on family and communities was really resonated with me. So thank you, Shane, for today. We encourage folks to join us for our next session on November 16th at 2 p.m. with Wendy Davidson, Glanbia Performance Nutrition's President of the Americas. We've got a link to register in the chat. And again, Shane, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Grateful to have you. All right, take care.